Amid mounting geopolitical turbulence, a fresh breeze is blowing across the Taiwan Strait. For the first time in almost 10 years, the chairperson of the KMT party has been invited to visit the mainland. The CPC Central Committee and its General Secretary President Xi Jinping have invited Cheng Li-wun, chairperson of the Chinese Kuomintang Party, to visit the Chinese mainland from April the 7th to the 12th, a CPC official announced on Monday. Soochow, head of the Taiwan Work Office of the CPC Central Committee, was authorized to announce that Cheng is welcome to lead a KMT delegation to visit Jiangsu, Shanghai and Beijing on the mainland. Su noted that since taking office, Cheng has expressed her willingness to visit the mainland on multiple occasions and that the invitation was extended to promote the relations between the CPC and the KMT and the peaceful development of cross-strait relations. Why is the meeting happening now? What signals does it send to both sides and to the wider world? And how might it reshape the trajectory of cross-strait relations? Welcome to this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Las Cruces, US, by Kenneth Hammond, professor of history at New Mexico State University. From Soochow in East China's Jiangsu province by Victor Gao, chair professor at Soochow University, and here in the studio in Beijing by Einar Tangen, senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation. The warmest welcome to all of you. But first of all, let's take a review of the past 5 visits by KMT chairpersons in their official capacity over the past 2 decades. The first one was in 2005 by Lien Chan. This was the first visit by a KMT highest leader or chairperson to the mainland after 1949, and also the first meeting between top leaders of the two parties in 60 years. Then in 2008 and 2009, Wu Po-xiong, as KMT chairpersons, visited the mainland, who helped promote cross-strait economic and cultural exchanges. In 2015, Eric Zhu Li-luan visited the mainland. He reaffirmed the 1992 consensus, and I'm going to explain that in just a moment. And he also attended the 10th Cross-Strait Economic Trade and Cultural Forum. Now, the last one was in 2016 by Hong Xiu-chu. She again reaffirmed the 1992 consensus and emphasized youth exchanges. So there was a quick timeline of past KMT chairperson's visit to the mainland. I'm going to go to Victor first. Victor, as I said, this is going to be the first time in almost a decade that a chairperson of the KMT visits the mainland. What's the big historical context here?
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, Chairperson Cheng's important visit to mainland is a milestone in cross-strait relations. Secondly, while we all attach great importance to her visit, I think her visit just reflects a megatrend. That is, there is only one China and Taiwan is part of China. So in that context, I think her visit will be very positive, very constructive, and also reveals the true nature of those Taiwanese separatists who want to deny the one China policy and to deny that Taiwan is being part of China. And I personally believe Chairperson Chen's visit will contribute to stabilizing relations across the two sides of the Taiwan Strait and eventually help achieving the ultimate goal of reunification. We all prefer to do this in peaceful ways, but then we are prepared to achieve reunification in other ways if there will be no other choice.
Professor Hammond, give us the historical perspective here and help the viewers understand this relationship between the CPC and the KMT. Not everybody follows Chinese history so closely. They had a very long years of, very hostile relationship. They were at a civil war, which literally is still ongoing. Tell us about this relationship.
Well, the Communist Party of China and the Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party, as you say, these were parties that were in strong opposition to one another. They fought bitterly in the 1920s. 1920s, late 1920s, 1930s. Of course, they allied with one another during the War to Resist Japanese Aggression from 1937 to 1945. But then a final civil war between the two the two groupings. Ends in 1949, obviously, with the victory of the Communist Party, the Red Army, the People's Liberation Army by then, and the establishment of the People's Republic. The remnants, I suppose we would say, of the nationalist forces and the leadership of the Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party, withdrew for the most part to the island of Taiwan and established themselves as the local authorities there. And that's a situation which has persisted ever since. That has been a situation that's been manipulated by the United States, which imposed its own naval forces between the mainland and the island. It's been a very tense relationship at times. Interestingly, in more recent years, as Taiwanese independence elements have tried to assert themselves on the island, the KMT, the Kuomintang party and leadership have re-emphasized the fact that on both sides of the strait we are the Chinese people, and that independence is not something that the people of Taiwan seek, and it's not something that's in the interest of Chinese people everywhere. So I think that it's been a relationship that has gone from one of extreme antagonism to one certainly not of complete identity, but of very fundamental sharing of a perspective on their Chineseness and the necessity to pursue a relationship between both sides of the strait.
You mentioned 1990. Actually, I already brought up the notion of 1992 consensus, which is a very important term for anybody to understand the official position on the mainland and by the KMT. It was an oral agreement, right, reached in 1992. Einar, help us understand the story behind that and why it is so critical that either you reaffirm it or you throw it out of the window. It makes a huge difference for China.
Well, it's like the three communiques with the United States. This is the fundamental basis of the relationship. There's only one China. That was accepted a long time ago. Taiwan was removed from the UN. And it was negotiated at a time when you did have the KMT in predominance. And they said, look, we're not looking to be independent. But then you have a group, as my friend in the United States has said, that's been encouraged by the US, basically as a card. And I think when you put this into current circumstances, when the Taiwanese look at what happened to Ukraine, or is happening to Ukraine, and what is happening in Iran, and the different groups who were, quote, allied with the U.S., had bases there. They thought they were shields. They turned into targets. There's real concern, and I think that is being reflected, especially with this oil crisis, that the people of Taiwan say, look, we didn't sign up to be a proxy in some sort of war that would destroy our country. We are Chinese. We have to come to an understanding, and this is what the KMT is doing positively, because literally the only thing the DPP has is fear-mongering that somehow being close to China, despite the fact that they're economically tied together, is somehow bad.
Again, to help people who are not following the situation closely, the DPP is the party that holds the executive power in Taiwan for the time being, and the KMT is not in power as, if you like it. But that helps you understand the kind of dynamics of the political landscape for the time being. I think it goes beyond saying that the mainland is very sincere and very eager for this meeting, as we can tell from the official stance, and instantly it created much media attention. How about on the island of Taiwan? I would go to Victor here. How much do we know about Cheng Li-wun? She was only elected chairperson of the KMT last October, and she took office in November. Tell us more about her and her political stance. Why has she repeatedly expressed the willingness to visit the mainland?
First of all, Cheng Li-wun is the chairperson of the KMT in Taiwan. In that position, She is very influential as a politician, as a statesperson, and as a leader for the KMT, as well as for some of the major fundamental principles represented by the KMT. Yes, of course, KMT is not the ruling party within the government, but KMT still is very influential in the parliament, for example, as well as in many of the county governments in Taiwan. In that way, Cheng Li-wun is a very important, very influential politician and a statesperson to start with. Secondly, I think Ms. Cheng Li-wun made her reputation as a strong supporter of the One China policy. After all, the One China policy is the basic point of everything between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. For many, many years and decades, the KMT government, while they were in control of the government, always persisted in the One China policy. And they acknowledged, yes, there was a civil war which was never officially ending, and they want to, promote the One China policy. At a certain point, they even talk about retaking the mainland, for example. So I think Cheng Li-wun is a representative of that line of thought, One China and Taiwan being part of China. Whatever problems there are between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait should be resolved by the Chinese people, among the Chinese people, rather than, for example, as some of the diehard separatists within the DPP now talk about, seeking foreign help to create the so-called independence of Taiwan separate from China. And therefore, I think Ms. Cheng Li-wun will be more important after this major visit to mainland China, because the whole population in Taiwan are on the verge of reaching a moment of truth. That is, who are we? Are we Chinese, or are we different from the Chinese? And her visit will tell everyone in Taiwan in the most eloquent way, yes, of course we are Chinese. We are Chinese at the top echelon of analysis, and we are Taiwanese on the secondary echelon. By being Taiwanese, it doesn't mean you are not Chinese. It's just against the logic. And secondly, I think this will also put whatever Ms. Cheng Li-wun represents and her party represents in sharper contrast with those die-hard separatists who still want to cling to the futile idea that they can achieve the so-called independence of Taiwan if, for example, they rely on the United States or even rely on Japan for help.
We'll talk about that. Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a moment. And very interesting, following on what you just mentioned, the public opinion. You often hear from the mainstream international media that the younger people are not in favor of that, of being identified as Chinese. They are more and more identifying themselves as something else. But actually, if you look at the changing public opinion, the picture is different. For instance, according to a survey that's conducted by a Taiwan-based and very respected local academic institution, the situation is quite different. For instance, this survey was conducted end of last year, and 54% of respondents, that is the majority of people in Taiwan, actually agree that the local authorities should maintain a friendly relationship with the mainland instead of spending more on buying weapons to so-called defend Taiwan against the mainland. Professor Hammond, what does that tell us about the changing public opinion scene in Taiwan?
Well, I think people on the island must be asking themselves a lot of very serious questions right now about their relationship with the United States. I think that recent developments, certainly in America's conduct in the world, whether it's towards Venezuela or Cuba or Ukraine or now Iran, the United States has just become even more reckless and more neo-imperialist than it has been in the past. And I think people are very concerned about, people trying to intervene in the internal relations between Chinese people on the island and Chinese people on the mainland in ways that are not in the interest of those Chinese people themselves.
Einar, that was an interesting number, I find. I don't know what is your opinion. in addition, there are other numbers which are also very telling and pretty much in line with what Professor Hammond just said. For instance, this is another major survey that was conducted in March, which shows that only 34% of respondents think America is a reliable country. That's a marked decline from 45% 5 years ago. And also, according to the same poll, 55%, again, the majority of people in Taiwan are skeptical of American security guarantee. And 22% are highly skeptical. That's much higher than the 16% last year. Einar, what are you seeing here?
Okay, first off, to make it clear, China is a civilizational culture. It's not a nation in the sense of Europe or anything like that, where there's all these different divisions. Taiwan has always been part of China, except during times when other countries invaded it. That doesn't make it theirs. So you have a situation today where the majority of people in Taiwan do not favor the DPP position. And why do I say that? Because during the leadership contest that happened, only 40% went for the DPP. The vast majority, 60%, voted for different parties who favored better relations with China. So that's a clear indication that it's a minority party. It has tried to change that by, challenging all of the all the representatives who were sent on the original contest, but it doesn't change the fact that the Taiwanese understand that they are part of a civilization, part of a country that was based on that, not these kind of notions that the U.S. tries to push, that you can determine what you want to be or whatever.
Well, as the public opinion is shifting against U.S. intervention in China's domestic affairs, from the people in the island, 4 U.S. senators actually arrived in the island on Monday, urging Taiwan's so-called parliament on to approve a military, $40 billion US defense budget. I know you want to jump in here.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, Taiwan gets between 95 and 98% of its energy from abroad and is not able to satisfy those needs. 70% of that comes from the Straits of Hormuz. They are right now subsidizing their oil. They do not have the money in this kind of circumstances. These chip factories, which are the reason that its trade has gone up with the West, are all based on having reliable energy. They cannot stop. They cannot have a brownout. They cannot have a blackout. So this idea that there's plenty of money around for military hardware which, as the Australians have found out with the submarines, isn't going to be delivered at any time frame that can be identified. The fact is the U.S. is running short of everything that they need to prosecute all their conflicts in Ukraine and Iran. They do not have the ability to do it. And quite frankly, their ability in the future is going to be curtailed by the fact that they're not going to have access to rare earth elements for these weapons of destruction.
So, Victor, given the current situation and given the desperation by some U.S. politicians to push further weapon sales at this particular moment in time, do you think the public opinion is going to continue to shift towards greater interaction, to maintain the friendliness across the strait rather than spending more on buying weapons from the United States?
Well, I personally welcome the positive turn in the public opinion in Taiwan, more towards better relations with mainland China and etc. However, allow me to make a very philosophical point. I've said before that even if the totality of the 23 million people in Taiwan support separatism of Taiwan, separatism will not be allowed to be achieved, and Taiwan will still need to be reunited with mainland China. Why? Because if you look at the case of the Civil War in the United States, the Confederation broke away from the Union, and President Lincoln and the Federation decided to fight a war to bring them back into the Union, despite of all the oppositions among the people in the Confederation. This is the reason why the United States, after the Civil War, has become one nation under God, indivisible. So I think those separatists who claim that if they rely on the support of the United States or Japan, they can achieve independence, this is completely futile. If they do not want to have one country, two system, eventually they will end up with having one country, one system, rather than separation of Taiwan from mainland China. Those separatists want to achieve the so-called Republic of Taiwan. If they want to go into that direction, then reunification will be achieved overnight because it will force China with no other option but to take non-peaceful means to achieve the goal of reunification. So I think the logic is very simple, very straightforward. There is only one China, and Taiwan is part of China. And regardless of how many people in Taiwan support separatism, separatism will not allow to be happen.
Right.
To
Well,
happen.
I mentioned that,
That is
yeah.
the simplicity of the
Yeah, I
whole
mentioned
argument.
those numbers because that's always been quoted or cited as a reason why, why politicians need to follow the will of the people. Even the opinion in the island of Taiwan are not what you are being told from by the international media. But Professor Hammond, let me get to you. What do you think is China's position and policy right now? Again, we're seeing paragraphs about its unification policy in the 15th five-year plan, and very much, I'm going to read it out, but what are you sensing is what Beijing wants to do vis-a-vis this invitation and going further? For instance, in the 15th five-year plan, China says it will stay committed to the One China principle in the 1992 consensus, resolutely fight against separatist forces aimed at Taiwan independence, and oppose external interference. China will promote the peaceful development of cross-strait relations, further the cause of reunification, and firmly maintain the initiative and the ability to steer in cross-strait relations. What's your take of Beijing's position?
Well, I think that's a very clear position stated in that paragraph from the 15th five-year plan. I think that is the position that China has held for many, many, many years, and I think that it is the position that it's the principled position which has animated their behavior. All the controversy about what's going to happen with Taiwan independence, is the mainland going to invade Taiwan? All of this is stirred up by American politicians. All of this is designed as part of a broader campaign on the part of the American political elites to generate hostility and fear among the American people and among people in the West more broadly about China. China being portrayed as a expansionist power trying to take over the world. It's just these ridiculous fantasies. But I think that China has displayed remarkable consistency and restraint in response to this. Clearly, it's absolutely, as Victor has been emphasizing, the central government doesn't need to renounce the use of force for reunification. Of course, they're not going to do that. The American government, as he very nicely pointed out, waged the bloodiest war in American history to avoid separatism back in the 1860s. So, the whole posture of the American government is so hypocritical and so just ridiculous. But I think that China's position is very clear. There's one China. Taiwan's part of China. We look for eventual reunification. We want to continue to work towards that goal. We want to work with the people on Taiwan. This is a long-term perspective. It's a historically grounded perspective, and I think that it's really the principled position which ultimately must prevail. I think the efforts to reduce or evade American intervention, American interference, American provocation, that's the real question. And that's something, of course, which people on my side of the Pacific have to deal with as well.
Einar, how do you see the potential outcome? What can be achieved? What kind of statements are you looking forward to coming out of the meeting this time?
I doubt that there be anything groundbreaking. What I think you have is a repeat of the last 5 visits, an emphasis on the fact that both are Chinese, both came from the Republic, Sun Yat-sen, the war against Japanese aggression. Remember, this is the 80th year of that in terms of the trials and many other aspects, the rape of Nanjing. These are all things that touched. Because remember, it was a joint force that opposed the Japanese when they came into Nanjing and did that. So there are so many things that are talking about how they come together. But I'm going to disagree slightly with Victor on this. What I have seen from what I've seen from China is about restraint. They do not want to conquer Taiwan. They want to reunify it. It's part of China. This idea that somehow they'll be railroaded, or even if they were pulled back in, there's no evidence that China would impose.
Understood. Victor, I'm going to give you the opportunity for this last question. Besides, and I'm sure of that, besides the reaffirmation from both sides about the 1992 consensus, which is there is only one China, and besides the strong opposition to Taiwan separatism, what are you expecting to come out of the visit that will be different from the past 5 times?
Thank you very much. Einar, Tangen and I normally disagree with each other. However, from my perspective, Victor Gao normally is proven to be on the right side of history. Now, while we will never give up our effort to achieve peaceful reunification, our patience is not unlimited, and time is not forever stretching into the future. Therefore, I think this important visit by Ms. Cheng to mainland China will result in several things. One, reaffirming the one China policy and Taiwan being part of China.
One China principle, rather, yeah. One China principle,
yes. One China principle, putting a stop to those separatists in Taiwan who really want to indulge in the fantasy that they can achieve so-called independence from Taiwan. That's number one. Number two is to start a framework whereby the two sides of the Taiwan Strait will need to sit down and start to talk about how to lead to this reunification, preferably peaceful reunification or otherwise. And whether Taiwan will still follow the one China, two policy, or whether eventually Taiwan will end up with one China, one country, one system, meaning Taiwan will become a formal province of China rather than a special economic zone of China. Then I think when Ms. Cheng Li-wun goes back to Taiwan, she will have a much bigger and stronger platform to tell to people of all walks in Taiwan what is the better way for people in Taiwan, what is the wrong and destructive way for the people of Taiwan. Reunification needs to be achieved. The sooner, the better, and it can never be allowed to be delayed forever and forever into the future.
We have to leave it there. I just want to wrap up perhaps with what Cheng told reporters. Just the last days, she said, war between the two sides is not inevitable. The two sides do not need to descend into danger and armed conflict. With our own wisdom and effort, we can together forge a broad road to peace. We have a choice. I think that's a very insightful comments. We are closely having hopes about the positive outcome of this meeting. We'll keep you updated on that. Many thanks to my guest, Ken Hammond, Professor Ken Hammond, Professor Victor Gao, and Einar Tangen here in Beijing. Thank you so much. And that's it for this edition of The Point with me, Li-Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X and YouTube with the handle Li-Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got a point.